In today's video, I'll be making a stew. This recipe dates back to the 18th century. It's rather good, and it's rather easy, and it entails just one pot cooking. So whether you're cooking it in your kitchen at home or on a campfire, you'll find this quite straightforward to make. Stay tuned. One of the main ingredients for an 18th century stew such as this is something called kitchen pepper. Now, kitchen pepper is a mixture of spices. It's sort of the direct ancestor of such mixed spices as herbe de Provence and things like this. It is made up, to the original recipe here, with 1 part pepper, 1 part cinnamon, 1 part cloves, and 1 part nutmeg. Also 2 parts of ginger and 12 parts of salt. It's made quite simply by mixing the ingredients together in a bowl. Now, I usually make up batches like this and set aside most of it by incorporating, just having it in a suitable jar, and then we can come to it. A jar with a quantity like this will last a very long time, but you can make it in larger or smaller batches, which is why I've referred to the ingredients in terms of numbers of parts rather than specific weights or measures. You can do it in teaspoons, you can do it in tablespoons, you can do it in ounces, you can do it in grams, whatever suits you. But it's 1 part each of the first 4 ingredients: the pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, 2 parts of the ginger, and then 12 parts of the salt. And then you have a nice even mixture like this of an even color. And this is one of the most popular, if not the most popular, spice of the 18th century. And there we go, 1 jar. We'll be making a couple of jars out of this quantity, and it will last a very long time. And of course, travelers in the 18th century would only need a jar like this, and they would be able to cook using no other spice than what's in here, because everything they liked was contained in the 1 jar. So just adding enough spice to get the stew or whatever else it was that they were making that required this going, it was easy, simple, easy, portable. Making it very good for campers today, because you only need to carry a small quantity. A modern camper might put it into a plastic jar, but you wouldn't necessarily even want to bring this much with you, depending on how long you're camping for and how many meals you're planning on making. But it is a simple way of carrying a combined spice that is complete flavor to your meal. So whether you're storing your kitchen pepper in a plastic jar for modern ordinary kitchen use, or a glass jar for reenactment purposes, or some other vessel, it's an extremely useful spice, and you can be as generous as you like with it. So to go over our ingredients now, you want 200 to 300 grams of red meat. In this case, I'm using venison. I often make it with beef. You can make it with lamb. You can make it with pork. Any red meat will do. We have 1 potato and half an onion chopped up. We have a small parsnip, and you either use a large carrot or a smaller carrot, carrot and a half of carrot chopped up, and also a handful of mushrooms. We have 1 glass of red wine, and we have half a glass of port. Now, if you were doing this with a white meat, such as chicken, turkey, something of this nature, instead of red wine, you would use white wine. Instead of port, well, traditionally they would use sack. Sack's no longer made, but the nearest modern equivalent would be something like a medium sherry. So you have red wine and port for red meat. You have white wine and sherry, something like an Amontillado, for example, for white meat. But here we're using the red meat. Now, we just need to do one last thing before we start cooking. And that is, I'm going to take some of the kitchen pepper that we've just made, and I'm going to generously coat the meat with it. And just add a tiny bit more. Now, that may look like a lot, but it's not really that much. What we're adding is, in effect, the equivalent of just a few spoonfuls of this stuff. There's plenty of salt in there. There's also pepper and the other flavors. I think that's probably plenty, more than enough. But don't forget, this is the only spice going into the entire dish. So this is going to add a lot of flavor, and once it's cooked, it'll be absolutely ready. I'm now going to move a few of these ingredients, get the pot out, and we'll move on to the next stage. Right, so I'm using a cast iron casserole pot, and what I'm going to do to begin with is add some oil to the bottom of the pot. In this case, I'm using olive oil. You can use other oils if you wish. We're going to get this switched on and hot, which will only take a few seconds for that to heat up. What I'm going to do as soon as I see that the oil is heated is I'm going to take the venison, I'm going to put it in the bottom of the pot, and I'm going to give it a bit of a stir. I'm also going to change to a slightly larger spoon because that will be a little bit safer to work with. Once I've done that, we're going to keep going until the meat has gone from red to brown. So we're going to seal the meat. That oil is now hot, so we're just going to put the meat in there, and you can see it's just slowly starting to sizzle because it's coming to a nice little temperature. And we can give that a few moments and then a stir. And it won't take long for this meat to brown. And the nice thing about sealing the meat like this at the beginning, obviously, it locks all the juices into the meat so it won't be too dry. This is especially important with something like venison that we're using here. The other thing that's happening here, of course, is that the oil is being infused with the flavors of all the spices. I'm going to lower the temperature a little bit now. And we're going to add all of our vegetables. And then we're going to pour in our wine and the pork. And I'm just going to give this a bit of a stir now. One of the things you'll notice is that the liquid level is not all that high. That's not a mistake. It's not meant to be high. The food will more or less sit just slightly proud of the liquid level. But that's going to change without having to add more liquid. But once we've got everything stirred a little bit so that everything is nicely coated with the liquid, I'm just going to put the lid on. This pot is now going to be allowed to just sit on medium heat for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up, give it a bit of a stir, check on it, and so we'll be right back. It's been a quarter of an hour. As you can see, a lot of the solid matter is broken down a little bit. It shrinks a little. So now, instead of the liquid not being quite deep enough, it's perfectly deep enough. And it's gone to a wonderful rich color. The smell is stunning, although it's still a bit rich in the alcohol at the moment from the wine and the port. That will get to be a little bit less over time. Incidentally, if you're camping, Rather than wine and port, you might choose to use, for example, a bottle of ale or a bottle of beer. They work quite well as well. This is a little more authentic, but to be fair, they were in the 18th century also cooking with ale and beer and such like. So that would be fine too. Right, we're going to go ahead and give this another 15 minutes, and then we're going to give it another stir. This is coming along very nicely. In fact, you could almost worry there's too much liquid now, but actually it's the level of the food, the solid food, and the level of the liquid are about the same. This is coming along really, really well. So it's had half an hour so far. We're going to give it another quarter of an hour and add our final ingredient, and then it will get a final quarter of an hour, and this will be ready to serve. So 45 minutes in, we now need to add flour as a thickening agent, because at the moment, beautiful and delicious smelling as this is, the liquid is very runny. So we want to add flour, and the way I tend to do it is with a tea strainer, because the tea strainer will sift that flour, and I'm just using ordinary plain flour, not self-rising. And I want the equivalent of a couple of spoonfuls, and this will provide me with that. And the nice thing about it is if I simply tap it, what comes out looking like snow is sifted. I can put that down, give this just a gentle stir, and again. Now this is a method of putting flour into stews to make a gravy that I came up with a long time ago, many, many years ago. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who does it, but it does work extremely well. I mean, one of the big complaints that you will ever see when people are making stews is, oh, it's a bit lumpy. Now, to be fair, lumps can be nice because some people use that to actually make a kind of a dumpling. But if you're just trying to add flour as a thickening agent without wanting to create lumps and just get the flour to more or less just dissolve right in, although this does take a couple of minutes to do because you're adding it very slowly, the fact is you really just don't get any lumps from doing it this way. And it doesn't really take that long. There's a couple of other recipes I do where gravy is a thing. For example, when I make, I make something like a pepper steak, which we're not talking about a steak with a lot of pepper on it. It's a very particular recipe. I'll teach it to you someday. Again, you want that liquid to thicken up, so you need to add the flour. And I found when doing that, again, this very simple, very easy method introduces the flour gently. I'm not sure if the camera is picking it up yet, but the liquid here is already thickening rather nicely. And for those who perhaps don't have experience making stews or gravies or things like this, basically what's happening is thickening agents cook. If I put a large lump of flour into liquid and cooked it as a lump, you would get a pretty solid mass. This is more or less, it's a little more complicated than that, but this is more or less what a dumpling is. By having it as a thin, evenly distributed quantity being put in there, it just makes that very loose liquid turn into a nice thick gravy. And one of the key features of a good stew is it's going to cook for a little while. I mean, if I did a smaller version of this on a campfire or a camp stove, and I would be using less ingredients and maybe even less time. But I mean, this is obviously a quantity of stew ideal for two. That'll be enough. So again, in its last quarter of an hour, everything is going to just finish cooking really nicely. Back on. And in a quarter of an hour, it should be ready. So now we have a thick, dark gravy. And it's just ready to serve. And there we have it, 2 plates of venison stew made in the 18th century style, what in the good old days was referred to as a good square meal. This is really eating. I hope you like this. I hope you have a go at it. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit like, please feel free to share, and do subscribe. Hit the bell icon and see our next video as well. We hope to see you again soon. Have a good one.